Hi, welcome to our weekly Lenten conversation. Today we're around the table. I am Deacon Kari. This is Pastor Erik and Pastor Amy, and we've been joining with each other and with you on Wednesdays during Lent to talk about covenant. Our theme this month is covenant during this Lent, and we've been looking at the Old Testament text each week, and today we are talking about the Ten Commandments.
Yeah, we've already spoken about the Noah story, which if you're interested in that, you can review. But otherwise, the Ten Commandments are a pretty familiar one. But let's find out what they say first.
Okay, so I'm reading this. It is Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. And I am reading it today from the Common English Bible. So it might have a bit different wording than what you're used to, but sometimes that helps us think about things a little differently. So here we go. Exodus chapter 20, starting at verse 1. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You must have no other gods before me. Do not make an idol for yourself, no form whatsoever, of anything in the sky above or on the earth below or in the waters under the earth. Do not bow down to them or worship them, because I, the Lord your God, am a passionate God. I punish children for their parents' sins, even to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. But I am loyal and gracious to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Do not use the Lord your God's name as if it were of no significance. The Lord won't forgive anyone who uses his name that way. Remember the Sabbath day and treat it as holy. 6 days you may work and do all your tasks, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Do not do any work on it, not you, your sons or daughters, your male or female servants, your animals, or the immigrant who is living with you. Because the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days, but rested on the seventh day. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, so that your life will be long on the fertile land that the Lord your God is giving you. Do not kill. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not testify falsely against your neighbor. Do not desire and try to take your neighbor's house. Do not desire and try to take your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox, donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So I think one of the things that I'd like to point out about this is that, we're talking about covenant this week, this month, this Lent, and, I want to think about how this fits in with our covenants that we've already received from God. I mean, way back when we talked about Noah's covenant, God's covenant with Noah and with all of creation. And then last week when we talked about the covenant with Abraham and Sarah, I think this is not, like those were kind of establishing covenants. Like they started the relationship and described the fact that, God want to be in relationship with you, humanity. I, God, want to be in relationship with you, creation. And I think this is kind of about, okay, here's how we're going to be in covenant with one another. Here's how we're going to live together and love one another. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, the other ones were very future-oriented, and this one is very much rooted in the present.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, how are we in a relationship with God and how are we in relationship with each other? Because we need to have that to be in a relationship with one another. It reminds me of like getting together with youth or doing things and we establish these covenants with each other because we are in a relationship with one another, and how are we going to live together, how are we going to be together, and just how important those are, and not just looking at it as a bunch of rules, but as a way to be together.
I want to build on what you're saying about relationship. In verse 2 here, it says kind of the introduction. God is reminding the people who God is and their past relationship. I'm the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the land out of slavery. And basically what God is saying is that I'm not brand new on the scene and bringing up these rules. God is basically saying, I've been with you for generation upon generation upon generation. For so many years, this is who I am as your God. And now, since we know each other so well, let's figure out how to be together first. So I think it's like any like parenting relationship or kind of an older person with a younger person. You can't just show up on day one and say, here's the list of rules. When I say jump, you say how high, because that's not going to work. But if you actually invest the time and the effort with people, then you can come out and say, I know you and you know me, and this is how I think we can keep going forward.
Yeah, and I think another thing about that with the relationship is that it kind of is, I know I just said earlier that it's not establishing a relationship, that this is a continuation, but the people of Israel have been in slavery in Egypt. They've been enslaved for a couple of generations at least. And so there might be a lot of folks in the community who really don't know as well what it's like to live as people of God. Like they're used to being enslaved and downtrodden and told what to do all the time and oppressed, and they're not used to having the freedom to be God's people in the way that God intended. And so one of the things I was listening to one of my professors from Luther Seminary, Joy J. Moore, this week on Sermon Brainwave from Working Preacher, and one of the things she said really hit me hard, and that was this point about that God is not just giving them rules to live by, God is giving them, reminding them of the freedoms that they have in their relationship with God. Now that God has saved them and freed them from slavery in Egypt, he's saying to them, look at what you can do now. Look at all these ways you can live as God's people in freedom and response to the love that I'm giving you. Here's how you can live. So it also, it doesn't just act as like, do this, don't do this. It acts as like kind of a testament to this freedom that they all have. You're free to worship only me. You don't have to worship that tyrant who made you worship them. You don't have to serve that evil empire the way you had to before. Now you're free to love me only. You don't have to hide your faith. You don't have to worry about being persecuted for it. You can just love God. How wonderful is that? You can care for one another. You can honor your father and mother and remember your ancestors and share your ancestral stories with one another. You can feel free to not have to scrounge for resources because you're giving everything you work for to the Pharaoh, this evil Pharaoh. You will have enough now. And so, I think that it's not just, this is how you're supposed to live, it's, here's how you're free now. Which is what Professor Joy was saying. And I was just, it was a mind-blowing thing.
Right, well, and we so often, it's like, you shall not do this, you shall not, and instead of looking at it as a list of things that we shouldn't do, and how do we look at it as a way of freedom as a way of grace, as a way of being able to live with each other and, love God and love your neighbor. How are we going to do that?
And I guess, part of reading it that way too, and recognizing that these sets of commandments were presented to a community of people rather than one-on-one kind of situations. And I think we get away from that because we have our Bibles at home and we read them before we go to bed or when we wake up, and we tend to always think that it's a very one-sided situation. These are my commandments rather than these are our commandments. And so when we think about it, that these were spoken and presented to a community of people for how everyone is supposed to treat everybody else. So not only are these things that I should not and should do, but these are a list of expectations that I can expect my neighbor to also fulfill with me. So I can live my life more at ease, knowing that every time I leave my house, someone's not going to come and rob it, and people aren't going to do that kind of thing. So it's more of my point is that this is a society thing, not just an individual thing.
Yeah, that's another aspect of that freedom.
Yeah. And if we look at it too, this is more about the neighbor than it is ourselves anyway. So the neighbor is pretty much an aspect of every single one of these commandments about how we should treat them. So how we should treat other people and how we can expect other people to treat us is really the nature of this, rather than a list of rules.
There's definitely a safety in that. It's a social contract, of course. Yeah.
I was thinking too about Psalm 19 that we read this week that goes with it and talks about the commandments giving light to the eyes. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but giving light to the eyes and then the sweetness of the commandments. And if you're looking at it this way, like we've been talking about, that makes sense.
We at Gethsemane are actually teaching the Ten Commandments in our confirmation program right now. Well, not right now because we're doing in Lent, but we're on a break during Lent. But in our spring term, so to speak, we're walking through all the commandments with our confirmation kids. And so I was thinking today, I'm wondering from each of you, which commandment do you think is the most misunderstood or under followed or
Oh, that's a good question. I think one of the hardest for me is the remembering the Sabbath day. And how do we remember that Sabbath? How do we keep that Sabbath time, whether it's a day or a Sabbath moment, or how do we honor that Sabbath time? That's one of the harder things, I think.
I would say there's two really. One that I think is really important, and as our congregations age more, I think it becomes even more increasingly important. But the honor father and mother. I know that one of the more common Lutheran interpretations is that it's not just about my biological mom and dad who are probably sitting around a table drinking tea and watching the old westerns on TV or something, but this is really about our elders. So not just our own biological parents, but pretty much people who are older than us. And how do we honor them and respect them, and how that's an extremely important thing for living in a community, and that's how God is expecting us to behave too. Being a bit of a globe-trotting person, one thing that I've recognized in my travels is that people in the United States do a pretty poor job, comparatively, of taking care of their older people. So other cultures are much more inclined and eager to take care of their aged members of the community. So I think that part especially Americans can do better at.
Mm-hmm.
Then I was also going to say just reflect on idolatry itself, really. And when we read this, we might just see on the surface that, okay, I shouldn't whittle some creature with a block of wood and bow at it or something. But it really means, what do we? Idolatry is anything that we put before God, as far as our priorities and our allegiance, and that can be money, it can be political nature things, and most likely it's even ourselves. So our own ambitions and things that bring us what we think is satisfaction and joy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one that I was thinking of as kind of misunderstood actually goes along with the idolatry piece, is the very last ones, depending on how you number the commandments. And in the NRSV, and the one that we're used to, it's do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife or people or animals or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. And when we hear this word covet, it's not a word that we use all the time in modern English. It's not a word that we think about, but and that's one of the reasons why I read the scripture from this version, because It says, do not desire and try to take. So it's kind of like, if you're desiring something so much that you're finagling a way to take it, you're putting that in front of your relationship with that person. You're putting that in front of your relationship with God, like that thing, whatever you want that's somebody else's. It's about jealousy and about idolatry in a way. And yeah, I just think that the word covet makes people misunderstand that commandment so much. So yeah, I think every one of us has our own commandment that kind of really gets to us and is a little harder for us than maybe for someone else. And so I just wanted to hear what we all think.
I'm really glad that this is part of the Lenten series about covenants, because even though these are such ancient words, they're so relevant and needed in today's world too.
And I hadn't really thought about the Ten Commandments being a covenant until we started looking at them. I'm like, oh, this is really a covenant. It's how we are in relationship and how we're going to be. And I hadn't thought about the commandments as a covenant before.
Yeah. God is saying, this is who I am to you, and this is who I want you to be to me, and this is how we're all going to be together. And I think that I love how it harkens back to the creation, because I think that these commandments, rules, words of God have been with humanity. God doesn't want us to kill each other. God didn't want Cain to kill Abel. God doesn't want us to bear false witness, or to lie to each other or to God. When Adam and Eve said, oh, no, like, we didn't do anything. God knew that they were lying. God knew that they were ashamed because they did something wrong. They did something against God. And so I think that this is also a reminder of that original covenant with us, that God created us to be in relationship with God. And this is how God created us to be with God and with one another. It's reminding the people, this is who I created you to be. Let's do that. And let me give you more clear guidelines of how I created you to be, so that you remember how to love one another.
Yeah, and just to remind people of the context is that they were people who had been enslaved for so long.
Yeah.
They had no agency. They had no ability, like you were saying with the freedom part. Their neighbor didn't have a house to covet. Their neighbor didn't have any possessions. They were not allowed to do anything or to be a person. So one of the contrasts is that us reading this kind of thing now, we are already more of an established people, more of an established society. But just think of how refreshing this would have been for folks that are just emerging from that lifetime of slavery. And that they get to rest. What a gift that is. They get to actually have stuff. They get to have a neighbor to care for. Really, really inspiring, really, really awesome things that we can praise God for providing. I have a blessing here. A couple years ago, I wrote about 5 different senses during Lent, and so I was reminded of that, and I chose this blessing. It's called For the Senses. But especially during this time of year when it seems that the snow is going away and there's more things to see and touch and smell in our life, this blessing really spoke to me this week. But it's from the book To Bless the Space Between Us by John O'Donohue. May the touch of your skin register the beauty of the otherness that surrounds you. May the listening be attuned to the deeper silence where sound is honed to bring distance home. May the fragrance of a breathing meadow refresh your heart and remind you that you are a child of the earth. And when you partake of food and drink, may your taste quicken to the gift and sweetness that flows from the earth. May your inner eye see through the surface and glean the real presence of everything that meets you. May your soul beautify the desire of your eyes, that you might glimpse the infinity that hides in the simple sights that seem worn to your usual eyes. Thanks for joining us today. May God continue to bless you in all ways.